Philip, hold to God's unchanging hand. That's a good message too. So we are glad to sing along. If you want to turn your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 30, that's where we will be picking up and wrapping up today. We're coming up to this is the last in our discussion of 1 Samuel. We have 2 chapters to cover today and kind of tie things together. But I want to start before we get into 1 Samuel. I want to start by asking you, how many people have seen this movie right here, The Dark Knight? I tell you what. All right, Max, we got a couple. All right, Darren, maybe some people are just too timid. But, this to me is one of the great movies. So if you haven't seen it, it's, you could watch the whole trilogy. But you guys familiar with Batman? Like, who Batman is? All right, just checking. All right. Batman has found in this movie, Bruce Wayne finds a man named Harvey Dent, who is this visionary activist. He's a DA, so Max naturally liked to watch. But he's a principal leader, and he's called Gotham's White Knight. Batman's the Dark Knight. He's Gotham's White Knight. But in the story, the Joker, you guys familiar with the Joker, the bad guy, right? But the Joker realizes that Harvey Dent is this beacon of hope to the people, and so his mission is to tear him down any way possible. The way that he does that, if you watch the movie, you've seen, the way he does that is by killing someone very close to both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent, Rachel, and as she dies, Harvey is confronted with what he believes to be the downfall of his idealism, and he throws away his principles and goes on a hunting spree for the people that he believed were responsible for the death of this very important person to him. Andrew's here, and I know Andrew's seen this movie as well, The Dark Knight. Okay, so we've got like 3 people that represent now The Dark Knight. But eventually, Harvey tracks down Commissioner Gordon, who's one of the big, one of the most important people in the Batman story and one of the people of integrity in the midst of all of the chaos. But anyway, Harvey is blaming Gordon, among others, for the death of Rachel, and Batman intervenes before he's able to kill Gordon. And eventually, to cut the story short, Harvey falls off of this building that they're in, and Batman does too. But Harvey dies, and Batman, I was going to play it for you, okay? But it was so dark, not like ominous, but like literally dark and hard to hear, so I thought it might be better to just tell you. But he falls off, and Batman and Gordon are standing there over Harvey's body, and they're just torn up about the reality that the people are going to lose hope. Gordon tells Batman that they're going to lose hope because they're going to discover that Harvey Dent became a monster. Batman's line in this movie is, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. But Batman looks at Gordon and he essentially says, you are going to hunt me. You're going to condemn me. You're going to set the dogs on me. I killed those people. So Batman takes the guilt and the blame for what Harvey has done and says, you bury the White Knight and I'll go on the run as the person who killed all these people, because that's what this city needs me to be. I'll take the blame. Say I killed Harvey too. That's the idea. And the movie ends with Batman running off into the night and Gordon sending the police dogs chasing after him, and he's the hero that the city deserves, but not the hero that they need at the moment, and so he can run away. The reason I share this story is not because Saul or David represent the Dark Knight. It's because it's a movie that if you watch it, it ends in a way that it's satisfying to the viewer in the sense that you're like, wow, that was a great film. but it doesn't end in a clean way. It's not like the story ends and everything is tied up, wrapped up perfectly, and presented before you, and you go, oh yes, this is the most lovely ending that could ever possibly be. I mean, the story ends with the hero on the run, and that's where the end credits find you. Well, 1 Samuel is an example among several examples of biblical stories that end in a way that isn't exactly clean or neat. 1 Samuel, like many of the other biblical narratives, it doesn't end with this perfect, and then Saul acknowledges all his mistakes, and he was forgiven, and David and Saul got along together, and the kingdom went smoothly from that point forward, and they all lived happily ever after. Now, one of the reasons that it doesn't end cleanly, it's messy, it's disappointing, perhaps, sadly, really, as the reader looks ahead into 2 Samuel, you realize that this messy, disappointing story in the life of Saul is in some ways going to carry itself out in the life of David too, right? 2 Samuel is a book filled with David's own personal failings and his family strife and all the things that go along with that. It's a very complicated and troublesome story. But this is one of the reasons that these biblical narratives have been so compelling to people for centuries and centuries and centuries. Because like the Dark Knight, these stories resonate with an aspect of real life. We live in a world where there are unresolved wounds, or unhealed wounds, unasked questions, unspoken concerns, even among the very best people that live. There are things that don't always wrap up just so perfectly and neat. And as we think about closing out this look at really Samuel's life and Saul's leadership, we're thinking about the fact that this story will leave us in a bittersweet and perhaps mostly bitter place as we think about the complexities of the story, and yet point us toward the coming of Jesus as the anointed king that we need to receive the kind of leadership, security, guidance, blessing that the kings of Israel failed to be able to deliver. So, we think about 1 Samuel 30. We're looking at two chapters. The first chapter is about David. The second chapter is about Saul, and that's kind of where the story wraps. David in chapter 30 is going to save the city of Ziklag. And if you were not with us 2 weeks ago, I just want to give you a very quick reminder of what happened in chapter 29 and even going back a little further. So David has been on the run from Saul. Saul's been trying to kill him. David has like 400, 500, 600 men that are fighting with him. He has fled to the Philistines, and there's a king over a city named Gath whose name is Achish. He has granted to David this little town of Ziklag to be David's residence, and David has been fooling the king, saying that, hey, I'm going to go out and wage war against your enemies, but really he goes out and he destroys the enemies of Israel. But he brings the plunder back to Achish, so Achish keeps thinking, everything is going great here. David's on my side, he's bringing me the spoils of war, and everyone's doing great. Well, in chapter 29, there's going to be this huge battle with Israel. All the Philistine armies, which they're kind of like this conglomeration of different smaller groups, they've all gathered together, and they're going to fight against the people of Israel. And so Achish has said to David, okay, come on, now's the time. We're going to really put you to the test. We're going to war against Israel. Saul is encamped over there. We're going to go battle. And David, always the clever one, with the right thing to say at the right time, says, you will learn what your servant can do. Meaning to Achish, hey, I'm going to fight for you. Meaning to the reader, I'm fixing to lay waste to you the way that I have to all these other enemies of Israel. Nevertheless, as they're about to go into the battle, they've left Ziklag, they've left, the area, they're coming up to the battle, and some of the Philistine commanders see David and they're saying to Achish, don't you know who this guy is? I mean, this guy, there's a saying in his city, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands, and you're letting this guy come into battle with us. I don't trust him. So they send David and his men back to Ziklag, away from the battle. David's very frustrated with this. He asks Achish multiple times, what have I done? Of course, if he only knew what he had done, but he didn't. What have I done that would give you any reason to doubt my loyalty to you? So he's sent away. Well, in chapter 30, David and his men come back to their city and they discover something horrible. The Amalekites, who are essentially, you should think of them kind of like marauding terrorists, if you will. They have come in to the city of Ziklag. I'll just read it for you. This is 1 Samuel 30, verses 1 and 2. We'll go 1 through 3. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negev and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. David returns from thinking he's going into battle to realizing that he missed a battle, and he sees this whole city is burned, this whole town. I mean, this is not like Columbus. This is a very small place, but he finds the town burned, and all the people have been taken. You can imagine, as we think about this, you can imagine the agony of loss that David and his men are experiencing. In fact, if you look here, you get some descriptions here in verse 4. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Let's just unpack just for a second here a couple of things that people going through unexpected evil, unexpected loss, whatever the case might be, some of the things that may happen. First of all, they're overwhelmed, right, with an agony. That's obvious. They're all weeping until there's no tears left in their eyes, no more strength to weep. There's a deep agony. But notice something else here that is worth pointing out. What was the people's view of David in this moment? They want to kill him. Why? Yeah, it's like, you led us here, this is your fault kind of a thing. The people are literally speaking of stoning him. But I want you to notice the verse 6 gives us a specific reason why. Because all the people were bitter in soul. When we encounter hurt in our own life, but certainly when we encounter hurting people, this is a great passage to remind us to be patient. These people are lashing out at David, but really it's just because they're being crushed under the burden of the grief that they're feeling, right? They need somebody to blame in a sense. It's a reminder that, sometimes sometimes, I don't know, you've had this experience, I'm sure, where maybe you say something to someone and it is like you just hit a raw nerve and they react very sharply based on what you say or something you did or whatever. Well, if you don't know the backstory to what they're going through, you might say, wow, who do they think they are, you know? But if you are able to give them the benefit of the doubt and to realize that there might be some bitterness of soul that they're experiencing, and these people don't want to kill David. I mean, these people have fought with David, they trust David, and they are going to continue to fight with David, but they're hurting. And love, at its very heart, according to 1 Corinthians 13, is patience, right? That's where it begins. And so David is the object of their wrath, if you will, in verse 6. But really, it's just a reminder to us that when people are going through times of grief and pain, what they most need from us is patience, right? And to just let them experience what they're experiencing. You don't get the idea that David goes on a protest and draws his sword and says, well, who's going to kill me, you know? That's not how this plays out. Anybody want to make a comment there or a question before we go on to the next paragraph? You understand what I'm saying, I think. We move from the pain of this loss. Well, let me not move quite. Oh, go ahead. Somebody had something. Let me not move so quickly. Let me just make one more comment. I forgot to make this. Notice the end, the very last sentence here. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. David is like a tree when rain refuses to fall. What does a tree do when there's no water? What are the roots doing? They're going down as deep as they can to try to find something. And I mean, there's various trees, but you understand the metaphor. That's the idea in the Psalms, and David writes many of the Psalms, right? That the person who is walking in the counsel of the righteous, person who's pursuing God's will, he's like a tree planted by streams of living water. The roots are able to find the water and endure even in the times of drought and desert. And so David, he strengthened himself in the Lord his God. His roots go down deeper and find the living water that calms his soul and clarifies his mind. And so let me do this. So we go from the agony of loss to, in verse 7, he seeks direction from God. Remember, in the life of Saul, 9 times out of 10, Saul sought God's guidance after he had already decided what he was going to do. After he sought God's blessing for his own plans, basically. David straight away goes to Abiathar the priest in verse 7, and he wants to inquire of the Lord. In verse 8, it says, he asks God, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? God answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and shall surely rescue. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, they came to the brook Bezor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. David, importantly, does not act out of impulse, but instead seeks the will of God. This is reminiscent of, and 1 Samuel and all these stories are so similar in the way they constantly have these themes that keep coming up. This is reminiscent of David's experience with Nabal and Abigail. Remember what David did when Nabal wouldn't honor him, wouldn't give him this meal that he was certainly deserving of. David's response was not to go and inquire of the Lord, but it was to say, everybody get your sword. We're about to slaughter these people. And it was Abigail's intervention. as she came humbly before David and said, "Listen, my Lord, I've brought all the food that you wanted and more, and I'm trying to spare you of shedding blood, I'm trying to spare you of blood guilt," I think is the way that she says it, and saving by your own hand. Who is one of the people that's been captured in this story? Abigail. I just wonder, okay, we're reading between the lines here, but you see David seeking direction from God, and whether or not he actually had this thought or whether or not he's just learning and growing, who knows, but perhaps David is thinking about Abigail, and maybe he even drifts in his mind. If it was a movie, maybe you would see him sort of have a flashback to Abigail's intervention, saying, you need to seek the will of the Lord first. And in this case, he does, and the divine guidance he receives is that he should go after them, that he will find them, that they will be rescued. And so David and his men set out. It's an important little detail here for later, the end of this chapter, and that little detail is that 200 men stayed behind at this brook called Besor. So there's 200 men that are left behind. So now 400 men are on the hunt. We'll get back to them momentarily. Here's what happens in the rescue mission. And I will read some, but not all of verses 11 and following. They're in the pursuit, and they happen upon an Egyptian slave who was slave to some Amalekites. He was a person that was at the raid. He was there actively involved in the raid, but over the course of time had fallen ill and had been left behind. So for 3 days and 3 nights, he has not had, according to verse 12, he's not had bread or water, anything. But I want you to notice verse 11. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David, and they gave him bread, and he ate, and they gave him water to drink, and they gave him a piece of a cake of figs, and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived. Look at the treatment that David gives to this man who is an outsider. He's not only is he an outsider to David's group and town, he's an outsider to Israel. He's actually a person who has been working for the enemies of Israel. And yet he sees him hungry and thirsty and gives him water and food to eat. That reminds us of the Good Samaritan, Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats and a bunch of other things. But David inquires about, what's gone on. And the man says in verse 14, "We had made a raid against the Negev of the Kerethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negev of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, 'Will you take me down to this band?' And he said, 'Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band.'" So David has an escort now to lead the people to where the enemy is. They come upon them in verse 16, and behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing. They're celebrating what they have accomplished. Now notice verse 17, "David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives." So David is victorious in tracking them down. The slave provides them the directions, and they bring upon these evil men the wrath of God and save the people. And they save the herds and flocks as well. This sounds like a great success, and it is, except as in many times good things happen, there can be disputes that arise in the process. Because they get back with all of the herds and the flock and the, whatever spoils that they were able to recapture from their city. They're coming back. Of course, they have the women, children, all that. Everybody's coming back home. And the way that the narrator tells it, he says some certain worthless men, but some wicked and worthless fellows among the men, they look over and they see these 200 men that stopped at the brook, and they say, these guys don't deserve a dime from the spoils of battle, because they didn't go the whole way. They didn't go into war with us, right? We're the ones who went down there and fought. We deserve what we deserve, and they don't deserve anything. We'll give them back in verse 22, the end, he says. We'll give them back, their wife and their children, of course. But that's it. I want to just frame why these men were exhausted really quickly before we cast any judgment along with these worthless men about them. Just consider that the trip that they had just taken, they had just been on probably 100-mile march in a few days' time to go to this battle with the Philistines, with Israel. They were dismissed from that, and then they marched all the way back. Then they had the emotional weight of seeing their whole city taken. Then they marched another 15 miles or so, and they came to this brook, and they're fatigued. And David instructs them, "Hey, stick behind with the baggage. We need some people to look after our things anyway. So you guys stay." Notice how David responds in verse 23. He says, "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike." And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. What is the basis of David's rebuke to the men? It is not that one of them, that he says, well, you both worked equally. That's not the basis of his rebuke. Notice what he says in verse 23. "You shall not do so, my brothers, with what the Lord has given us." David credited God's deliverance for the reason they were successful, not the effort of this particular part of the group. So in other words, David said, while you're insisting on being recognized and receiving more than everybody else, what you're failing to recognize is that you wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for the fact that God was with us on this day. That's the first thing. And I would just, if we make this practical, I'll just say that answer is still important for us today, right? There are times when, as much as we wish this wasn't the case, there are times when even the best followers of Jesus fall victim to vying for credit, right? Looking to be the person on the top, looking to be the person who gets the glory for whatever the case might be. And when we do that, we're starting to give ourselves the credit rather than God the credit. We're trying to really take credit for God's work. That's the idea behind what David says. Not only that, we fail, this is the second thing David gets at, we fail to understand that people have different roles to play, but the roles are all valuable. David didn't see the men who guarded the baggage as being cowards or as being people who were less than. He saw the value in what they did, that we really needed somebody. We just left all of our stuff and it got taken a few minutes ago. You guys remember when we went to our city, they had robbed it all. So what we have, it's probably a good idea if we do keep an eye on it while we follow someone we don't even know if we can trust to where he claims the enemy is. So David sees value there. Well, this is so predictive of what the New Testament is going to teach us about how we interact with each other. Jesus has the parables of the workers, right? You remember these guys, a couple of them come at, 6 a.m. They're there saying, hey, we're here to work. Okay, great, I'll give you a denarius for your work, or whatever it was. I forget the coin that he's going to give them. Great. 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. rolls around, another batch of workers rolls up. Hey, we'd like to do some work. Okay, great, you're hired. Noon, another batch. 4 p.m. rolls around, another batch. 6 p.m. rolls around, another batch of workers. And they're all leaving after working in the day, and the owner of the vineyard or field or whatever it is, he starts handing them each the same coin for their work. And what happens? You remember what happens with the first group? What do they say? Well, not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair that you chose to bless these others with what we earned. We had to work for ours, but they got theirs for doing very little. Paul talks of the body of Christ, and he uses the metaphor of the body, saying, there are some features of your physical body that are much more, they're more prominent, they're more visible, and others that are not. He said everybody wants to be an eye, everybody wants to be the mouth, whatever. Everybody wants to take center stage. But he says, what would a body be if the whole thing was eyes? Sounds like what we read in Revelation, right? A few of those creatures. But what would the body be like if it was all hands or all mouths? It would be nothing. It would be less than useless. Everybody has a part to play, and it becomes a rule forever in Israel because it teaches that principle. Anyone want to add anything to that? We've got a little section here to finish in chapter 30. David ends this section by again calling to our mind that parable, but David comes back to Ziklag and he sends some of the spoil of the battle, some of what they've recaptured, he sends it to these different places in the land of Judah. Places that, is David the king of Israel right now? No. I mean, yes, but no, he's not. No, he's not the recognized king of Israel in any sense at this point. David has no obligation to these people in Judah. They certainly have not they have not gone to war for him. But he sends spoil from the enemies of the Lord in verse 26 to these various places. Notice what verse 31 says. Okay, it's in this place, in this place, in this place, in this. For all the places where David and his men had roamed. Do you remember, let's go back to the story of Nabal one more time. Do you remember, in the story of Nabal, David had been roaming in this area where Nabal's shepherds were. And David was caring for them, protecting them, making sure nothing happened to them. And he went to Nabal and said, "Can we have a meal, please? We've been serving you. We would love to eat something." He said, "No, who are you? Get out of here." David has been keeping record of the people that have allowed him to shepherd the flock in peace. And he said, I'm gonna send you a gift of thanks. They didn't have to, like David, come to David and say, we would really love just a little something for the work that we put into keeping you guys safe, or letting you guys roam in our fields. We sacrificed, our sheep could have been out there, whatever. He said, here you go. I'm blessing you because you've already blessed me. Didn't owe them that, but he's the man of integrity compared to Nabal, who says, I don't need anything, or I don't want to give anything to David. Well, now, in our last few minutes, we get to the end of Saul. It's been a tragic story with a tragic conclusion. The rise and fall of Israel's first king. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to tell you that the people are overrun by the Philistines, and Saul's sons, including Jonathan, are all struck down by the Philistines. Now you think about what would have taken to strike down Jonathan. I mean, this man was a warrior of warriors, but they were overrun. There was nothing that could be done. God was not with them in this battle. And what you find is that Saul and his armor bearer are they're between a rock and a hard place. Their backs against the wall, that kind of thing. And Saul says to his armor bearer, "Kill me. I don't want to fall into their hands. You kill me." And he says, I'm not going to do that. So Saul takes his own sword or a spear and he falls on it. Now we learn in the next chapter, this is 2 Samuel. We're not going into 2 Samuel, but we learn in 2 Samuel 1 that actually Saul's attempt to kill himself was not totally successful. That there was another man who came upon him that found him alive and that killed him with his sword when Saul, asked for him to, basically. This is 2 Samuel 1, verse 10. "So I stood beside him and killed him because I was sure he could not live after he had fallen." So he took matters into his own hands. Anyway, Saul attempts to end his own life. An Amalekite ultimately kills him, but he dies. The first half of this story of the book of Samuel, which is 1 Samuel, it ends with a hint of hope, as in the last 5 verses, or maybe 6 verses, Saul's body is carried off, it's mistreated, Jonathan's body and everything. But these men of Jabesh Gilead, they get everybody riled up and they go in the night and they rescue the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and the sons of Saul and bring them back, and they're not going to be desecrated anymore by the Philistines. I mean, they had Saul's body nailed up to a wall. They had him, he was beheaded and all kinds of disturbing things. So there's this slight positive note that despite Saul's subsequent failures, the people of Jabesh Gilead, if you go way back in your mind to 13 weeks ago, Saul, in one of his best acts, he delivered Jabesh Gilead. He saved them, and they have remembered that, and they have honored Saul for who he was, not who he became. And they went in and defended his honor in that sense. Is it true then that perhaps we can honor what is honorable in a person's life, even if they end up going down the wrong road? Isn't it true that we can honor what has been honorable in a person's life, even if they are currently walking down the wrong road? That we can understand that God has been at least at work in their life, even if they have wandered away from God in the present, or maybe they even died in that state. David, when he heard the news that Saul died in 2 Samuel 1, he laments repeatedly. It's a poem, it's a song, but I'll just give you the beginning and end. You've heard this probably in just vernacular as well. How the mighty have fallen. How the mighty have fallen. For David, the end of Saul was not something that he rejoiced in, something that he lamented, because the Lord's anointed was dead. And the story did not end well. And while David would become king as a result, David became king because it was God's will, not because David tried to interject himself as king and say, "I'm going to take over now." And so David, lamenting Saul, will eventually be crowned the king of Israel. I want to close this way. I want to first give you an opportunity. What is something that you've taken away from our study of 1 Samuel? What's something that in all of our lessons maybe stuck out to you? You said that this is something I hadn't noticed before, or this is a point of application that I'm interested in thinking about more. Yeah, go ahead. Seeking the Lord in times of need, definitely, yeah, absolutely. Other things that have stood out to you from, yeah, Mary?
Abigail was just such a great woman. You know, to face down a whole, I mean, I can see this valley and David and his troops coming down.
Yeah.
And here she is.
Right.
You know, and in that culture, even.
Mm-hmm.
Just such a great woman. And she just did what needed to be done. And from a woman's point of view, cooking for all these people and getting your tents ready and getting all your cooks and everything together to cook for a whole army of men is major.
Certainly, she did what she could do, though, right? She did what was within her capabilities to do, and right. Yeah, she said, yeah, I know my husband's a fool, but please listen to me. Yeah, which is what she needed to do in that moment. Absolutely, and she really is a kind of a type for Proverbs 31, which, while Proverbs 31 is a description of this idyllic woman, it's really a description of wisdom, right? What is wisdom? Abigail in that story is the embodiment of wisdom in how she discerned what to do and did it well. Here's a couple things I thought of just as we're wrapping up here. We got about another minute. I think 1 Samuel reminds us that God is patiently at work in our messy, complicated, broken world. And sometimes in David's life and sometimes in your life and my life, we wish he was a little less patient, right? Let's get cut to the chase here. Why not make things move a little faster? And yet, we're reminded again that love at its heart is patient. And there's something about the love of God that moves slowly. And that slowness is the only reason that we are able to have hope. I won't say more. There's a word of caution, how the mighty have fallen. Unfortunately for David, there's going to be a need for him to listen to his own lament, because in his own life, his pride is going to get the better of him. And just as Saul is going to have his fall, David's arc is not one that is just up. And then lastly, I'm really glad that Jesus is king. That's what 1 Samuel is all about. It's about the coming king and the failures of that king over and over again. And there comes one, this root of David from the stump of Jesse, this one who's coming, who is going to be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. That's our time for 1 Samuel. I've enjoyed looking at this book. I don't know that I've ever taught the book, and hope you have enjoyed it as well.